These aren't the stories your mother told you. No, these are the other stories.
Today's episode of The Other Stories is Plea Deal, written by Georgia Cook and narrated by James Barnett, aka Jimmy Horrors.
Errington inspected the reflection in the round silver compact he kept in his coat pocket, adjusting his spectacles and brushing away a few stray hairs from his forehead. The compact occasionally earned him odd looks, usually from anyone new on the duty desk, not yet familiar with Errington's various eccentricities. But he ignored them. Satisfied, he clicked the compact shut, pocketed it with care, and pressed the security buzzer next to the tall barred door. It slid open with a clang, permitting entrance to the white corridor lined with identical white doors. Errington made his way to the middle of the row. He didn't need an escort. He knew this place like the back of his well-manicured hand, layout and occupants alike. He made sure of it. The room beyond the door was sparse and clinical, containing just a table and two chairs, bolted to the floor. A pane of thick black glass filled one wall, glinting like crystallized ink. The surrounding walls and floor were bare grey concrete, lit by a fluorescent strip light that glowed just a touch too bright, a touch too sharp. The room's single occupant sat at the table, his hands clasped, his foot tapping with anxious energy. He looked like a banker, or a more media-savvy brand of politician. His hair dark and well-groomed, an expensive suit jacket flung over the back of his chair. Errington allowed himself a smile, noting that the man had chosen to sit with his back facing the wall of black glass. They always did. Another buzz. The door slid open. The man jumped to his feet as Errington entered. "Who the hell are you?" Errington's smile widened. He'd met many clients in his time. Most, if not all of them, greeted him in this manner. A small, neat little man with his impeccable tweed suits and his smart little bag. Errington put most prisoners in mind of a clerk, or a slimier breed of accountant. Errington took great pride in his appearance. He cultivated it. "My presence was requested, Mr. Blake," he said, crossing the room and sitting down in the free chair, unclipping his briefcase with two sharp snaps of the clasps. "My name is Errington." "You're in charge?" demanded the beleaguered Mr. Blake. "No. I asked to see whoever runs this place. The top bloody brass. Not some." Here, his lip curled. "Duty Solicitor." Errington's eyebrows rose. "Indeed. And yet here I am, Mr. Blake, and here, regrettably, are you." He motioned to the chair Blake had just vacated. "Please sit down." It was hot inside the cell. Blake was sweating profusely. "This is a sham," he snapped, lowering himself into his seat. "A put-up job. Anyone can see that. Anyone with sense." "Indeed." Errington retrieved a small folder from his case and flicked it open on the table between them. Several pages of neatly typed notes slid out, accompanied by a black and white photograph of a smiling woman, dark-haired and bright-eyed. The camera had caught her half-turned, as if about to share a secret with the photographer. Blake's expression froze for a fraction of a second as he met the photograph's gaze, then his eyes flickered away. "You killed your wife," said Errington. It was a statement of fact, not a question. Blake's head whipped back around, his face turning a deep purplish red. "How dare you?" he began. Errington held up a slim grey hand for silence. "You killed your wife, Mr. Blake, after which you proceeded to drive your car into the Silent Hills National Park lake with the intention of faking your own demise and hiding her body, whereupon you were found and taken in." He flashed Blake a thin professional smile. "And now you are here." Blake reddened. "These are lies. My wife's death was an unfortunate tragic accident. To see it already transformed by the press into some smear campaign." He stabbed a finger at the paper folder. "Any witness reports you may have in that little file of yours are entirely fabricated. Is that so? Blake lifted his chin. Errington could see in his expression the ghost of a man who had once commanded entire newspaper headlines. Could make whole press conferences dance to his whim. What little good it had done him now.
I shouldn't be here,
Blake said, rising to his feet. He was a tall man, framed by the thick black glass behind him, edged by the bright white light of the fluorescent bulbs. He looked almost impressive. Errington's lip twitched.
Please sit down, Mr. Blake.
He sighed, brushing a speck of lint from his sleeve.
I believe there has been some confusion. Finally, someone talks sense. I do not take clients through some misplaced sense of charity, and I am not summoned. So? My presence here was not requested by you.
Blake's mouth opened and closed, his expression a mottled mixture of outrage and hope.
Then who?
Errington waved him into silence.
Do keep up, Mr. Blake.
He drummed his long manicured fingers on the tabletop. Blake's gaze followed them down to the cluster of papers lying between them. Beneath the glare of the fluorescence, it almost looked like the woman in the photograph had turned completely towards them, her eyes sparkling with something that might have been mirth, might have been knowing intent.
Your wife.
Errington glanced at the photograph, smiling an appropriately professional smile.
She gave us an exceptionally thorough witness statement. More details than we required, really. But she seemed very eager for you to know.
Blake blanched.
But she's dead?
Finished Errington.
How good of you to say so, Mr. Blake. I am sure there are many people on tenterhooks for your confession.
Blake's face had turned a mottled red. Sweat dripped from his forehead, slicking his hair. For a moment he seemed almost to have frozen, as if the force of Errington's calm, careful voice were enough to shut him down completely. Then suddenly, he uncoiled in a burst of movement. Errington had just enough time to register the man's trembling hand rising from his pocket, before the end of something slim and sharp plunged into his chest. He rocked back in his chair, staring down at his immaculate white shirt. Whether intentionally or not, Mr. Blake had aimed exceptionally well. The end of an expensive silver pen, slick with ink and blood, protruding from a spot just to the left of Errington's ribcage. Blake stood frozen across the table, half wrenched out of his seat by his own momentum. His eyes stared sightlessly, round and white, a speck of light quivering within each black pupil. Errington sighed, gripped the pen in one delicate hand and wrenched it out. It made a sound like a butcher's cleaver after the first chop. His blood glistened black under the prison lights, shining this way and that like engine oil. Errington admired it for half a second, then drew a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the pen clean.
I hope you don't mind if I keep this,
he said, letting it drop into his waiting suitcase. Blake's mouth quivered, as if he were holding back either a scream or a bark of laughter.
Were you planning on using that on whoever came through the door? I can assure you it would not have worked.
He wiped a spot of blood carefully from his fingers, Blake's hands clenching into trembling fists. Any crumb of composure gone completely.
There's been a mistake. Please.
Errington sighed as he stood.
The devil, as we are so very fond of saying here, does not make mistakes, Mr. Blake. You, however, have made a great deal in a very short space of time.
Blake cowered. Standing, Errington was tall enough to block out the buzzing fluorescent light, his shadow sweeping across the tabletop as he lifted one needle-sharp finger.
No survivors were pulled from Lake Silence last night. Nobody survived that tragic little accident, as you say. But
Errington uncurled a second finger.
Neither. As you so helpfully pointed out, were there more than 2 witnesses to your wife's murder? Then who? And finally, Mr. Blake.
Errington unfurled a third finger, relishing the dawning realization on Blake's haggard face.
What I consider to be the most rudimentary mistake of your pathetic little life.
He leaned across the table, taking great care not to disturb the paperwork between them.
I am not, and have never been, a duty solicitor.
Blake's mouth formed another fragmented question, but he was at least bright enough to stop himself. His eyes flickered, as if finally taking in his surroundings. From the bleak white walls to the endlessly flickering lights, the pitch-black darkness beyond the tiny high window, the churn of fetid air, hot and close in this too small, too bright little room. Everything so carefully crafted, designed with care to foster the utmost misery in the shortest span of time. How had he gotten here? What was the last thing he remembered? Errington could see Blake putting the pieces together. The human mind works so hard to spin normalcy out of chaos, but it never lasted. Nothing so fragile lasted down here. The sharp shock of water, the flash of icy cold, the grip, tighter than steel, fastening around his chest. And then nothing. And then he was here.
What's happening?
Blake whispered, his voice sounding small and lost, the wide-eyed uncertainty of a child. Errington extracted the printed sheets carefully from their folder. A smell like rotten meat rose into the air. Each word glistened a disconcerting burgundy black, as if the ink hadn't even had time to dry.
You held out perhaps 30 minutes longer than your wife,
he mused, flicking through the pages.
Long enough for her to arrive down here first and file a request. A request? I did tell you.
Errington smiled.
I do not work on charity, Mr. Blake.
He shuffled the sheets, careful to let the photograph of the smiling woman remain on top.
Tell me, where exactly do you believe you are?
Silence filled the room, disturbed only by the disjointed buzz of electrics, the gentle tap-tap of Errington's long grey fingers. There was a subtle pleading in Blake's eyes now, as if begging Errington to reveal this all to be some terrible joke, a moment of unprofessional conduct to rival them all. His hands were shaking.
My wife,
he whispered.
Indeed, a very enterprising woman, I thought. Willing to sell her soul to its your eternal torment.
He chuckled a light little chuckle.
I told her we would have thrown it in for free, but she insisted.
He stood. His limbs clicked as they lengthened, stretching fingers as long and sharp as knitting needles across the table. The woman in the photo between them had turned completely now, staring out with the bright, interested eyes, her smile coy and knowing. Beyond the black window, the souls of the damned held their torment to an uncaring and unfeeling abyss. The heat of a million blazing fires seared the air, turning the metal doors of the prison hot and tactile. Blake stumbled out of his chair, backing away against the rippling black glass. Hands pressed against the other side, scratching and scrabbling, grasping for light, for help, for the smallest glimpse of mercy they would never again receive.
What if I confess? Is that what she wants? A damned confession?
Errington smiled at that, both the question and slip of words. His reflection in the glass behind Blake grinned too, each tooth sharper than 1,000 glistening blades. Errington always looked different in mirrors.
It might have been a start, Mr. Blake,
he said, brushing a speck of invisible lint from his suit shoulder.
But I think we can both agree it is much, much too late for that.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Other Stories. Plea Deal was written by Georgia Cook, narrated and produced by James Barnett, aka Jimmy Horace himself, with music by Tim Coolig and Tom Robson. Its sound effects provided by freesound.org. The episode illustration was provided by Luke Spoon of Carry On House. Quick thanks to our community managers Jasmine Arch, Joshua Boucher and his eyeless ones, Mary Pastrano and Cody Czarzasty, and to Joshua Boucher for helping with our submission reading. And of course, in the quantum dance of digital crime, Ben Errington pirouettes endlessly. Georgia Cook is an illustrator and writer from London. She's written for publications such as Baffling, Visterion Lit and Flame Tree Press, as well as the Doctor Who range with Big Finish. She can be found on Twitter at Georgia Cooked, and on our website at georgiacookwriter.com. James Barnett is the producer of the Night's End podcast and After the Gloaming. Search for them wherever you get your podcasts. You can catch other works of his at jamesbarnettcreative.com. The Other Stories is a production of the Story Studio Hawk and Cleaver and is brought to you with a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. That means don't change it, don't sell it, but by all means share the hell out of it. So,
until next time.